All right, my name is Brian Gray, and I'll be talking about Google Classroom and growth mindset. I think that digital tool can really help teachers have the opportunity to really work with their students to help them get through their failures and learn from them, and also become more successful with the feedback tools that they have. So that's what I'll be talking about today. Classroom. I use Google Classroom a lot, and I also really get into the growth mindset idea. Just kind of a little bit of a backstory for me. The fact that I've actually presented 6 or 7 times at different conferences is a very big growth mindset thing for me, because when I was a 9th grader and we had to do this really big speech contest where like if you win you get like a big prize or whatever, I had this amazing speech where I was really excited. I loved whatever I was talking about. I was about my uncle, my hero, and I could not get through the first sentence at all. I like stuttered straight through it. The teacher had to like almost pull the cane to pull me off to the side. I had to work really hard after school every single day just to be able to finish that essay. And so the fact that I'm here now is kind of crazy, because even when I was first a teacher and I had to do my first sports award as a coach, I was really excited or happy that there was a podium there so people couldn't see me doing like jazz legs underneath. My knees were just like shaking like crazy. So it's really exciting that I can kind of see where I had all these kind of failures and I've slowly gotten a little bit better. I'm not going to say I'm a perfect speaker. I talk very fast sometimes. I had a basketball camp this summer and there was a girl named Crystal in it. So she would always raise her hand to say, "Can you repeat that, Coach Gray? I didn't get it." And so I just would always remind her and ask her, "Hey, was I crystal clear on that one?" And she kind of got it, but some people laugh. But if you catch me going a little too fast, don't be afraid to stop me and ask me questions. I have no problem with that at all, because again, I'm here for hopefully you guys to get a few things out of it. So kind of the first thing too, of course, I don't get like one of those little clickers and stuff like that, but so I'll be moving back and forth, but it's kind of something that I do. So how many people here have actually read Growth Mindset, let's see. Oh, click on the link to start. There you go. How many people have actually read Mindset by Carol Durant? Only one? Couple? I have to say, most of the time when you get a book through PD, it's something that you read the first few pages and be like, I already know this, I don't want to read anymore, it's the summer. But this was a book that really drew me in. It talks a lot, and if you haven't read it, I recommend reading it. Would you recommend it after reading it?
Oh, absolutely.
It really helps you understand the psyche.
My whole staff.
Excellent.
I hope that they
And so for me too, there's like sports stories in there too. It always talks about the Michael Jordan getting cut from JV and then becoming the best basketball player of all time. It also helped that he grew like 6 or 7 inches. But the idea here is that anyone can get better and can continue to improve as long as they learn from their mistakes and they're not afraid of failure. And so that's kind of what we're going to look at today. Looking at how can we use Google Classroom, how can we use Google Docs to help our students not be afraid of the failures that they're going to have, because they live in a society that is completely judgmental. Right? I always joke, I'm only 30, I'll be 32 this year, and I still feel old sometimes because I didn't have to do all the social media things. I used to have to go on AOL Instant Messenger, and that was that's a commitment, right? When you get online to AOL Instant Messenger, you're committing to 10 minutes of waiting before you get out and talk, and you can always put an away message up if you don't want to talk. That's not the case anymore, right? They are constantly being bombarded with judgments, whether they like it or not. And so one thing in our classroom we have to be aware is we can't judge, right? We have to kind of teach, and we kind of have to help them understand things more, right? And I don't know if you guys remember, but in school sometimes, that letter grade or that number that you got on a test after waiting a couple weeks for it to get back, you resonated with that. That became your number. I was an 86. I did not get a 90. I did not get an 80. And so you get kind of scared sometimes when you put all of that work in and then you wait long enough to get it. So judgment can be a really scary thing. And you think about what the students go through nowadays. They post something online, and then if they don't get 2 likes in the first 30 seconds, they're like, oh my goodness, what happened? And friendships can be lost if you don't respond to text message within the first 30 seconds. So you think about how quickly they look for feedback, and how quickly it can turn to judgment if they don't get it right away. It really puts you into perspective. So we're going to kind of talk about how to create a learn and keep learning mentality. Keep working, keep building up, instead of just that nervousness about when I get that grade back, what does that mean to me? Because in the book they kind of talk about it becoming an identity. It becomes something that they now take as their own. So, and it's something that is really tough too, because it can be an identity. Because parents, you drive around and you see on their bumper stickers it says, I'm the parent of an honor student. and that honor roll could be good one quarter and it could be gone the next. And so they're terrified about having the parents have to scrape off that bumper sticker, right? So it becomes an identity and a label. So grading can really be a scary thing, and it can really be a big judgment in their lives. So the number one thing about a growth mindset, it's important to have feedback. And it's important to have feedback that is timely and able to help them. Every word in action can send a message, and it's crucial to a child's development, something that she said in the book. What the picture is right there is that's actually me going through and looking at a treaty that they are creating in groups through Google Slides. And so each group has a slide that they are working on. So I can actually see, as they are discussing and then putting down the terms, I can see what they're writing. So I can actually go around to each of the tables and I can talk to them and infer with them what's going on. Like if I look and I see that they're not writing a lot of sentences for territory, but they started talking about the borders of Jerusalem a little bit more. This was an Israel-Palestinian conflict thing I was doing. I can actually go over to that desk and I can just start talking with them a little bit. Also too, if I know some of those kids are a little scared of getting feedback or like having someone raise their hand and having the teacher come over and get that stigma, I actually can put a little bit of like a Google comment on the side for them as well. But little things like that help get feedback right away. Sometimes in those type of situations when everyone is just talking and it's not connected, by the time they get the feedback, it's too late. You probably heard, I already finished that, Mr. Gray. I don't want to go back and restart it. It's much easier to get work done as you're getting the input as it's going, right? And so that's where kind of Google Slides or looking at just giving feedback when you can and kind of the way that you do it as well. And with me, they know that I'm monitoring around and I'm talking with them. So that's kind of one example. But the biggest thing to know is that you need to start or hopefully help get more feedback to the students as they're doing it while they're in the process instead of kind of after the fact, which can add to a little more hustle and bustle in the classroom. I put a lot of steps in when I'm doing that thing because I'm moving around. But in the long run, it helps because later when I'm grading stuff, I'm feeling much happier about what they're doing because the product is better because they've had the feedback as it's going through. So the other big important part is focusing on the process. Students sometimes have a difficult time understanding that this is step one of a multi-step process. And I actually teach in a school where we are competency-based, and so the idea is that the stuff that they're learning right away, they're not going to be perfect at it. And unfortunately, or kind of fortunately, that's something in life that they have to deal with all the time. I know when I was first becoming a teacher, I was not a great teacher, but you can't expect to be a great teacher the first day. And I'm still not a great teacher. I still need to continue to build. But it's a process. And as long as you can get those students to kind of buy in, this is step one, here's step two. And so a lot of feedback also needs to be something that helps build. The feedback needs to have the student's interest in mind where you're here now, here's where you're going to get to, and here's the steps to get you there. So we'll take kind of like some scaffolding as well. And I know with those treaties and stuff, I kind of built up the treaty process and had them kind of take a look at what they needed to and kind of help scaffold them a little bit. But it's really important to talk about, this might be your grade now, or this might be when we're having this conversation of feedback, but if you work on this and build up, it can be better later on. You can improve. And I think the important process is really telling those students that this is the first time you're looking at it. And for someone who teaches world history, for a ninth grade, this is something that they usually don't see very often to start. They do a lot of US history, so they don't know a lot of this stuff when they're coming into my classroom. So I tell them, this is the first time you're experiencing this. As you get more experience, as we start building stuff, you're going to be a much better expert. And I think when students realize that you're not expecting them to be perfect at it the first time, because I know most teachers aren't, but that's sometimes the thought that people think they come in, like, well, Mr. Gray wants me to be this good right away. And so it's more of a process. So feedback has to be something about a process. And one thing that I also did over here was I have all the students, they're showing their summative presentations. These are students that actually finished a little bit ahead of time or a little bit on deadline. There were some kids that were still struggling to finish up. I actually allowed them to work on the other side of the room. I have a divider up room. So I put them over there and we were working with them individually, and then I gave the students that were finished with their assignment, I allowed them to do a peer circle. And so they went around and they actually gave each other comments based off of the rubric, and then they were allowed to make adjustments to that rubric, make adjustments to their project afterwards. And so it's a process thing too, where you get your assignments done, you're looking at the things that you need to. The students that are still struggling to get some of the stuff done, we gave them more feedback to help them on one side, and then also allowed the students to give each other peer feedback as well. And so even allowing them to rework a presentation or a project that they thought was done is very valuable as well, because like, oh, I just got all this great feedback, can I then make sure that I can add those things to it? And so a rubric is important too, as we talk about a little bit later. So I think the one thing is important is I see a lot of times, I don't know if you guys feel this way too, but I think that students are terrified of making mistakes. They don't want to be seen as someone who doesn't know the right answer. They don't want to be seen as someone who can't do it. A lot of times students won't even raise their hand just so they don't have to worry about giving the wrong answer. And again, it's that kind of that judgment society. That's what they live in. And so one of the biggest things I always preach in the very beginning is I talk to the students about you can't learn unless you make mistakes. Right? You can't learn unless you try it out first. And I always kind of give an analogy too. If I was a softball coach and you got up to the plate and you stood there and you're like ready to go, saw you going, and then you let the first pitch go by and it's a strike. You let the second pitch go by and it's a strike. You let the third pitch go by and you don't even lift your bat off the shoulder and it's a strike. You might be terrified to not hit that ball, but when you come back to the dugout and you say, hey coach, how can I fix my swing? I don't know because I never saw you swing. And so that first step is making sure students have that opportunity to show you what they can do. And so I build kind of a lot of things in my assignments as well that have Google planners through, and I have them doing their Google Docs as they're going, looking it over as they're working on it and giving them feedback as well, letting them know that it's okay that maybe they misstep on something. But I also think it's important to let them know where they're misstepping as it's happening. I think it's a lot harder to go back and fix a mistake after it's already been too late or after you wait too long. I know when I was in high school, you'd do a quiz and you'd wait for 2 weeks to get it back, and then the teacher would be like, here's the things you need to go fix or put in your notes. I didn't do that. You know, it's like asking, they'll talk a little bit later, it's like asking someone who just painted a whole room that they missed a spot, but you ask them a week later after they put all their equipment in the car, like they're not going to come back that day, right? They may not even come back, they say fix it. But if you have someone there saying, hey, you missed a spot, and they still have all their stuff up, their apparatuses, they can make that quick adjustment. So again, it's kind of the same idea, like giving them that feedback quickly and letting them know too, it's okay to make mistakes. I know one thing I also push in my class is whenever we're working on anything, they can ask me to take a look at it and I will tell them where they are on the rubric right then and there. So I will go through and I'll highlight them. So they could be working on an assignment and they're not sure about whether or not how they're doing. They can actually, I can come to them and I will give them where their grade is. So they can keep building off of that. It takes a little bit more hustle and bustle again, but it's a lot better than at the end when a kid sits there for 20 minutes, doesn't know what he's doing, and then I get it back later and I'm like, wow, he's still at like this NM spot. So kind of rushing around a little bit and getting those assignments, and it's nice to have the kids say, hey, can you take a look at where I am right now? I think I'm at this level of the rubric, can you tell me if that's where I am? And so once you start getting that type of buy-in, then you really start getting more learning because they're not afraid to make mistakes. They're willing to allow you to be a feedback coach to them. So making sure that you add that idea of mistakes equals learning can really cultivate a better learning process. So one of the books I kind of read on the side, I'm a little nerdy. I don't really listen to music on my way into work. I listen to audiobooks and stuff like that. So when I say I read this book, I listened to it on audio for a few days until it was done, or I'll listen to podcasts, things like that, because I just don't have time to read right now as a teacher, a coach, father of a 2-year-old. It's just, I don't have time. If I'm reading books, it's like small sentences for my daughter. So when I was listening to this podcast, it was really cool. This teacher took her classroom and she completely got rid of grades, completely. Just didn't give a grade to any kid the whole semester working on it. And it was all just based on feedback and portfolio building and having students be able to peer interact and give feedback. And at the end, which was kind of crazy, she allowed the students to give themselves their own grade. Now, like, that's not always the easiest thing to do, but she built it up enough that she felt confident that once they were finished, they knew where they were at in their process. And so it was a lot of class where they were just doing student-centered work, where they were building up these different things. They were on different steps, and she was working with them. Right? And she got a lot of blowback from parents and things like that because they wanted to know where their grades were and everything. And it's not something you can do all the time traditionally, but I think just the idea of it sometimes where you kind of put the grade in the back seat and you're more concerned about here's the feedback. I know a lot of times with my students, I don't tell them a number or anything. It's based purely on the rubric and we do competency grading where we have maybe 2 or 3 competencies being assessed. So there might be multiple rubrics. So they won't actually know their overall grade on the assignment. They'll just know where they are in the process. And I don't tell them what their overall grade is. I'm like, no, this is where you are in your rubric, so keep working and build up there. Or you forgot this part, add this part. And when we talk about kind of rubric building, if you build a rubric that allows you to have that type of feedback conversation, it goes a lot easier. Because it's a lot easier to talk about here's how you get to the next step, than here's how you get to like a 95, a 96. So you kind of see that she kind of really, her big theme was power of feedback. How can you get people to grow without having them be grade hungry? Because I know a lot of times too, there are the students sometimes like, how do I get this A? And it's like, we'll work on the steps here, and then there's some other kids too that, they'll, how do I get this lowest passing grade? And so if you can build the conversation, here's where you are, here's where you need to go, it really helps a lot. And so I'll show you kind of what I do with my rubrics later on. So how many people use Google Classroom? All right, so if I'm saying anything that you already really know about, don't be afraid to just kind of stop me. Because again, I don't necessarily think everything I'm saying here is revolutionary, but I do think that you can use Google Classroom as a great tool to monitor students' success, to be able to look at what they have. I mean, if you don't have Google Classroom, it's really tough because students lose papers all the time. They lose resources all the time. In my classroom, I allow students to use any resource they want on any summatives, because I'm never asking them anything that they can just use their notes and regurgitate on. So I make that as almost like their growing portfolio. And so what I do, because the one thing that's difficult about the Google Classroom is they have like the grades where it's numbers, and they don't allow you to do multiple, like if you're doing multiple competencies. So I don't use their grades at all. I copy and paste the rubrics directly into their assignments, and I put it right above so that way I can highlight as they're going. And so like that's what I'll actually sit at my desk, and I will just, it looks like if you're walking by, you're like, oh, Mr. Gray's just hanging out at his desk doing like something else, crosswords, things like that. I don't know why I went crosswords. That's like 1940s. I don't know why I went with that. That was my thing. No, it's on papers. But doing something different, but I'm actually going through each of the students, and I'm giving them comments as they're going. Because you can also see too, you look around your classroom, there's a kid that just looks like they're staring off, or they don't necessarily know what's going on. Open up a quick little Google chat and get them back on task. What can I do? I've copy and pasted resources for them as they're working on it. And so I have a good indication of what each student knows as they're working on it versus waiting to the end and hoping they got it. So. And so the nice thing about Google Classroom is when you're copying an assignment, if you do it in the beginning, it goes on every single kid's. Yep. And so you just copy and paste, and I just highlight as I'm going. Yeah, and so the kids can see it automatically. When I started moving to that format, it just made things so much easier, and the kids can see it.
But I feel like that's way smarter.
Yeah, and the thing is too, I'm lucky too, we're 1-to-1, so we have Chromebooks. So if you have Chromebooks, like it makes it even easier because they can have access to it. I also let students use their personal devices to display their rubrics as they're going. And so they can have that on their phone and then be working on it and check on it as they're going as well. So, because they can just open up the doc and have it there, or they like to sometimes just take pictures because it's easier for them, and they have it there as well. So that way they always know exactly what you're expected of them. And I usually will give that rubric beforehand, or I'll tell them exactly what they need to know before the assignment. Most of the time too, I start a unit, I tell them exactly what we're going to do for the summative at the end, because that also helps the process, because they know where they're starting and where they're ending. So I know as a basketball coach, when I do drills that I say are going to be 2 minutes long, I'm getting much more effort than if I say we're going to scrimmage, and I don't give them a time limit. So like they're like holding on to it a little bit as well. So it's kind of the same idea. Tell them what you're going to expect them to do, where they should be at a certain point, and kind of build that process. Do a lot of people put their rubrics in their Google Docs?
I used to rubric extensions to it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've looked at that add-on too. I end up going like simple most of the time. I used to for a while just use Paint, and when I could use like Photoshop. But you can use those same type of ideas. But I just think having them visually see it is helpful. So, and that works right in with Google Classroom, super easy. Also too, I also use Google Classroom to I always put down what the directions are for each assignment too, so that way even if they're not fully listening to me, they know exactly where they're supposed to be as well in the process, where they're building through. I put the assignments up like a day before as well, because there's some kids that like knowing what's going on before. That helps them up too, so just staying organized. So the biggest thing is about having a growth mindset classroom is being able to develop learning experiences that allow students to be able to kind of be in charge of their learning a little bit more. It doesn't involve a lot of lectures. It doesn't involve a lot of having students like taking just non-interactive text. It's looking at actually making them do things with information. And so so I'm trying to think of what the right way is. Right, you want to pretty much build experiences that allow you to have instant feedback. And so there's some things that we'll kind of talk about, like Kahoot. We'll talk about, like, again, Google Classrooms, different things that you can get feedback right away. Nearpod. How many people have used Nearpod in here? Oh, good. So we got one up there. So do you like it?
I love it.
Yeah, so that's good. I can enlighten you guys on Nearpod anyway for something quick to get feedback right away too. But learning experiences that you can deliver your content and then be able to give them real-time feedback right away. People have done Kahoot though, right? Yeah. And that's like the fun game one that people get into, but it's just multiple choice. You can only use it for so much things, but they love hearing that music and getting started. But learning experiences that allow them to get real-time experience, real-time access to those documents. The picture right there is during a French Revolution assignment. We're talking about the storming of the Bastille. And so I'm having them look at primary sources, listening to a song, the national anthem of France, looking at pictures from it, and then also watching a YouTube video. And I made a Google Doc that has all of those items in it, so they can access them all. And so they're kind of rotating through and working on each one, so they can have it and take a look at it, and I can see where they're at strategy-wise. And I actually I'm a visual person, so I do have them move around the room, even though they can do it right at their Chromebook, so I know what station they're working on. Because again, it's easier to give feedback if you know what kids are working on and where they're at, so that makes it easier too. Because then I also know too, if there's a certain harder section, I can gravitate myself a little bit over there, knowing that some of the other sections are good. And you can tell that just by looking at the Google Doc. But we'll talk a little bit more about simultaneous things to help out. So Kahoot, like I told you, it's, obviously, like I said, a lot of people have played it, but the kids get instant feedback right away. And so I will do that in the beginning as either content, just a quick check. They just did a little bit of a reading. Here is your feedback. You can send the results back later. And I can say, oh, Johnny didn't get it at all. He was 2 for 10. And you have to keep into account some testing ability. Some people don't do well in those type of pressure situations. But you can get a good gauge of where students are in their content. So then the next time you may want to go back and do a little bit more with it. Do another part of that assignment if everyone did terrible on the Kahoot. But the whole idea too is you are looking for different benchmarks as you're going, because you have that end in mind. And so, like I said, a Kahoot would be kind of an intro one for me as well. So Nearpod is a great way to introduce resources, and they have a free version and then they have a little bit more expensive version, but the free version will get you quite a bit. So it's kind of a way to do a PowerPoint presentation, but much more interactively. And I use it very rarely as a PowerPoint, more as a way to deliver content and then get feedback on how well they're doing on it. And so if you imagine everyone in here has a Chromebook or has a personal device. It can be pretty much anything. It works on all of them. And so you can control the screen as they're working through it. So you could put up maybe a political cartoon or a primary source, have them read it, and then you could hit the next page and you could have them do a formative question. And then you can see all of the answers as they're coming in. So I can see exactly who's answering what spot, and then I can actually share it out with the classroom as well. So I know you can also do a lot of different features. You can I've had them do political cartoons where they draw them and analyze on them, and then I share the drawings. I recently had in our geography unit talking about what's the best trade routes, and they would write the trade routes in. And so I would be on my iPad and I would see all of the different things that they're putting in. So you can give real-time feedback right away because you see exactly what they're putting down as they're doing it. And so it's a good way to kind of see what the students are doing. And also too, if you see that a lot of kids are struggling on a question, that's when you can kind of go back and add more to it. That's where it really becomes a learning process. Because a lot of times with old quizzes and things like that, you'd have them, reading that material, and then you'd wait a little bit, you'd grade all of them, and you'd give them back, and it's just too long. It's too long. But if you don't have Nearpod, I would definitely check it out because they also have a lot of other cool features like 360 field trips, things like that. So you can actually have it click on and they can look through like at the Globe Theater, they can look at the Palace of Versailles, and so they can actually see the stuff that you're talking about. When we did the Renaissance, there were certain paintings that they could take a look at afterwards. But it allows you to do short answer questions too. It's not just multiple choice. Draw on, there's plenty of different ways. Math teachers can even post up math equations and they can draw right on the math equation, and then you can see how every kid does well or not well on that assignment, and it'll help you go through that. So there was a lot of different useful information for that. Like I said, it's not necessarily a presentation because it can be a lot more things, a lot more formative stuff. You can also have them do it in homework mode too, which means they can just go at their own pace as well. So a student misses a day or something like that, you can post it up and have them look through it and still get the information. But when you're talking about giving instant feedback right away and talking to students too, as you're learning this information, I'm going to be able to track what you know about it. That also gives them a little bit more power to try, because you can also see that they aren't trying to, and you can have a conversation with them. You know, because I look around and I see someone struggling with it, and I see that that's blank, and we're getting closer to the end there. I'll go over and have a quick conversation. I'm like, hey, where are we falling off here? What did you not get? And so that allows me to kind of intervene right away. And so Nearpod is really good, especially when you're doing new content, where you just want to make sure that they get everything they need from it. So I was talking about a little bit before, alluded to, that's me at my desk. That's me looking over documents. And so I will highlight documents as they're going. I tell the students too that don't be afraid, I'm going to pop in and out of your documents at any time. The students also get to the point where like, hey, you haven't looked at my doc yet, Mr. Gray. And so like you start building that process where they actually are willing to take in your feedback. And I've had kids like pop up chats on me quickly and say, hey, I'm not getting this, can you help me? And that's the type of kid that probably would have been terrified if you came over because everyone saw that he was not getting it. It's also kind of interesting too, sometimes if they're in different parts of the building working on things, like maybe they have like an FLT or God forbid they have like an inside suspension they still need to get work done, they can still access me as I'm going in class. So I'm able to kind of help them out. Like I had a kid, I'm at this presentation today and I was able to give him a few feedback as I was doing this in between. But I think it's really important to have that tool because when students know that you can instantly feedback with them, it makes them want to learn quicker. And I usually too, because I'm grading these as they're going, by the time I'm done, I'm grading like 5 out of the 30 papers in a class, or like 5 out of 30, because I've already looked at each one other ones and I put the grades in. I even tell the kids too, when you're done, I'll put the grade right in. So I get it into the grade book literally the day they finish it. And so I'm getting things back within 1 to 2 days. But I'm also, instead of that time where sometimes you would have a summative be like, ooh, I have time to do this. You don't, you're instead working on that feedback, but then you have more time at home. And for me, like if I can do all my grading as I'm doing it and it's beneficial to them, that makes more sense to me. It's more playtime with my daughter Adeline at home. So that's a good thing on my part. And the kids really like it. They like the fact that they get feedback as they're going. So, and again, that's using comments, highlighting, using suggestion mode. I mean, there's so many different modes, and since most people raise their hand for Google Classroom, you probably know this already. So, but it's a great way to give feedback as you're going. And what I talked about before, we're talking about that fear of judgment versus learning. They're not getting judged anymore. They're just getting, feedback, timely feedback. So I call it more kind of like evaluating them as they're going. So I do rubrics a little bit differently. So I don't know how people are going to take it or not. But a couple of things when I think about a rubric, I think about real world examples. Recipes, a lot of times you have to start with the ingredients, then you have to start with the steps. Then you finally get to the final product. I kind of expanded a little bit and tried cooking more in the summer when I had time. And so the YouTube videos and like the ingredients menus first was very helpful to me. If I saw the final product at the very beginning, it kind of scared me off. But if I knew what the ingredients were, I'm like, oh, I've worked with those before. Here are the steps to get there. It kind of helped me build. So I actually have my rubrics go from left to right. I know some people like to have their highest benchmark go first. I have done some study on it. It goes back and forth. Really, the only thing scientists can come up with for this, or educational researchers, is that humans like to read from left to right. They don't say what should go first, but they say left to right. And so I like to build my rubrics up because, again, it's a process. So I look at step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. I look at what my learning outcome is, and I look at, okay, in order to get there, the first thing you need to do is this. Second thing they need to do is this. Third and fourth. And so I'm not using words like they clearly articulated, they more clearly articulated, they the best clear job that they could. I don't use those type of adjectives. Instead, it's more about like, here's the task, here's the next task, and by the time you put all 4 of those tasks together, you are now knowing what you're doing. I always kind of joke with them if you're making mac and cheese, but you forget to boil the water, like it's not mac and cheese anymore. So here are the different steps. Because sometimes if they get the limited and the basic, but they don't have the proficient, and they did do the exemplary part, they're getting a BP until they work on that proficient part, because they need to have all 4 components there to get that whole grade. And then I've also played with other things too, like doing top down as well. I also like color coding. I think it helps to kind of see like, red, here's where I want you to keep building and going from. Yellow, like you're in the clear passing wise, but I'd like to see you try to get the green and kind of working that way. They seem to respond well to that. I look at rubrics also as like painting a wall. I mean, some people like to start at the top, at the bottom, but I'm thinking like, if I have my ladder set up, I'll go top, middle, all the way up to the top and see, and then I want my wife to come in and point out spots that I miss and things like that as I'm doing it. And so getting that real-time feedback. Climbing Mount Everest is another way. Like if you think about if someone told you you have to climb Mount Everest and they just show you the top, like all the way up, the very first thing you see, that would be terrifying. But if you told them, here's the training you're going to do, here's the base camp, here's the other, I mean, it's still going to be terrifying to some. But the idea is that it's much more manageable. And I find that when students see the first part, the first step, they're more inclined to start it than if they see the last step you want them to. Or if you're kind of just building it up so it's very difficult for them to understand. So most of my rubrics are build and when you're ready. And a lot of times they will have things like they need to have the first part before they can move on to the next part. And so that allows me, when I'm giving my feedback, to also tell them where they are on the spectrum. Where are they in the competency? Like, do they know enough to get to the next level? And I can actually talk to them, hey, you forgot this. Here's the part you need to add. And so they respond well to that. And when you're highlighting, it makes it easier because they can see visually where you have them and where you don't. Does anyone have any questions on the rubrics? How many people use rubrics? That's good. So, how many people are in a competency-based education? Okay, so it transitions through. But I definitely think if you are competency-based, you definitely need to have rubrics because it's really difficult to show kids where they are if you don't. So, just kind of a quick sample here, like as I'm going through, and this is one of my student teachers who was working on it. I highlight just using regular highlight tool and just show them where they are, and then I give comments on where the rubric is, and then I also give comments in the document as they're working on it. So a couple quick clicks, they now know what they need from me. And so like here, the student didn't talk about globalization. So I'll try to expand this area a bit more. You tell me what it is and how it exactly occurred. So like they highlight globalization, they now know when I go in, I need to find out more about globalization. And they could also respond back like, I don't know what globalization is, where can I find the information? And then you could highlight in something from what you did before. Or with Google Classroom too, you just link it. So I usually take their assignments, I'll open it up and I'll just link it, put it back in. Hey, look at this formative. This will help you with that experience and information. Now apply it. So all the kids will see on the top, their rubrics all highlighted through on what we did. So one of the things that I also do, which is a little bit different, I talked about Kahoot, I talked about things, but I also, when I do any type of summatives, I give them planners, or I give them something to do that I can track their progress in before they do something else. Recently, I just did a Canva project where I had them writing making a media. They did an infographic on Martin Luther, whether he was a hero or a heretic. But before that, they had to show me all of their source work and their facts and their information on a Google Drive, so I could see them actually working on it. So that was when I could actually catch kids before they started working on the final product. And so I can see what people know, what students know. One thing that I do too is that if they don't fully finish that Canva project, maybe they're not digitally inclined, and I'm looking for the content, I will look at their planner and give them some type of grade on the rubric as well. Because you think about it, they were doing research, they were doing experience. I'm not grading them on can they make an infographic. I'm grading them on how much of the content they know. And I found too that if I give them a grade on the planner, more kids usually reassess and put in the Canva afterwards because they know that they're on the right step instead of like giving them nothing for what they did. Because I see them in class too. I don't usually make them do a lot of things at home because I like to be involved in the process. It's really tough sometimes to have them go home and start working on something or do it and then they come back and it's not what it needs to be. So I give them as much time, hopefully in class, that they can get accomplished. And then if they really don't use that, that's when they got to do it at home. But we do reassessments at our school. I'll talk about that a little bit. But we allow them to keep working and keep improving their work. There's no settling, because I think that's an important thing in life, not to settle, to keep trying to build and get better at it once you get the feedback, because you want it to be a process. Once they get the feedback, you want them to do something with it. Otherwise, why are you spending all this time giving feedback if they're not going to go back and look at it afterwards? So one thing I do too, when they do the assignments, I'll set up filters in my email as well, so that way I know when kids are revising or when kids have resubmitted things. It makes life a lot easier, because otherwise you get thousands of emails. So in basic kind of, I was looking through, I first would start off like Kahoot, then I'd start with a Nearpod, then I would just kind of continually give them feedback on it. So people seem to have a good grasp of what we're talking about with this one. So again, highlighting through it, making sure that they're getting feedback as they're going. So collaborative documents, again, you can do slides, you can do sheets, you can do any of the docs. Basically anything that you can jump in and out of is really helpful to teaching this growth mindset. Because when they are comfortable and used to having someone constantly checking their work and also being readily available to them, it makes them also want the feedback and be interested in actually knowing what you want to say. A lot of times, like, they used to be, when I was in a class before, kids would be afraid for me to look at their stuff. They're like, I don't want you to look at it. You know, and you want to get to that point where you want students to be noticing if you're not even looking at their stuff yet. Like I said before, I have students raise their hand like, Mr. Gray, you haven't looked at mine yet. Can you look at it? I joke sometimes I need like a deli counter. Because like I'm like, number 41, you're up, number 42. But you know, like, and the thing is too, they keep working while they're waiting too, which is nice. And like, just keep working on the next section and then I'll help you with that next part. And so, you know, like I said, a little more hustle, but a little less grading at the end. So one other thing you can do is having students kind of working within their own groups and doing something collaborative well. I did a content where we're doing world religions, which is not always the easiest unit to teach because there's just a lot of information. So having each kid kind of research it and then put it into their, like, into a collaborative slide allows them to have access to it whenever they want afterwards. And also it helps make them be a part of the process as well. You know, because the learning process, if you make it like something that the whole class has to be held accountable for, you know, it helps them say like, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is why we're supposed to be doing it. You know, and then when you tell them afterwards, you can use that information on a summative, that everything that you're doing in the class that is formative, you can use in the summative. It also adds to that process as well. And so I always tell them, I promise you, I will make you never do any busy work. Everything that you do in class will be tied into what we do in the summative. And if you don't understand how that's working, ask me and I will tell you how it will work. And so a lot of kids, they will keep looking back at their notes and things like that because they know that it is important and they'll be answering that stuff. And I don't grade all of my formatives either, but most of the time kids are doing them, whether it's graded or ungraded, because they know it's part of the process that goes through. So giving documents that they know that they need to use, having them be able to access it later is all extremely important. So kind of just to review here, Google Classroom. Right, educators can monitor students' progress easily and conference with students on progress. All shared documents have the ability to be commented in real time. Google Classroom allows for resubmissions, and so I put in my email so that whenever a kid resubmits, it pops up in bold so I can see it. And so I can go ahead and be like, oh, you know, so-and-so resubmitted. I can go take a look at it and grade it quick enough. And the nice thing about it too, when you have a rubric that's built in spots, I just go up to the top and I hit newest revision, and I just read the stuff that they added. I don't go back. I don't read the whole thing again. I read the spot they have. So I'm not making them do new assignments, things like that. There's nothing they can copy from the last one because it's all stuff that I'm asking them to apply. And so I see they resubmitted. I check what's the new stuff. I look at where they were in the rubric and say, does it meet that or does it not? Give them more comments. So it sounds like it would be a lot more work, but it's really not. You're reading 2 or 3 more sentences or a couple more things that get put in. Allows students to have the ability to collaborate on the same assignments. Common stream on Google Chat allow for students inside and outside the classroom. So you're really giving more feedback. A lot of it's digital, but let's be honest too, a lot of the kids like digital. It was funny, I was watching 2 kids yesterday. They were talking through Facebook chat, but they were working on the assignment. They just didn't want to talk verbally to each other. I thought it was weird, I'm not gonna lie, but you know, I was looking at it, they were doing it, and I'm like, okay, fine. You know, if you want to do that, that's fine. And so they were getting the information back and forth. Some of them are just more comfortable with that type of mode. And so it's good to have at least some type of idea with that with Google Classroom. So kind of the last thing is allow reassessments. right? And give feedback on the fly to let them before assignments turned in. I know lots of, like, I'll look at it when you're done. That was kind of like the old philosophy, right? Or I'm going to grade it and I'll get it back to you within 2 weeks. And thing is too, I like Google Classroom because you're not bringing home papers. I hate bringing home papers. You know, I used to actually work part-time. My boss knows about it, so I can say it. But I used to work part-time at a pro shop in golf. And so when people weren't in, or I used to love rainy days because I get all my grading done and get paid to hang out in a pro shop. But I mean, be able to bring it with you and work on it on the fly is good. And I think it's important too to really give students the opportunity to know that they can succeed, but there are going to be some things. You know, you might not get it the first time. And I think when growth mindset, the way they talk about it is like, people celebrate the success. We look at people in our society and we think that they're amazing, but we don't look at the things that they did to get there. I mean, it's funny to me that with school that I go to, most of the boys basketball players think that they're going to go number one in the NBA, right? Because they see all the people, they watch and they play NBA 2K on them, you know, but they don't realize how much extra work that those people are putting in to get there. You know, like, I mean, Kevin Durant, he spent all of his time in the gym. Like, he never left. Like, you know, social life, he was literally working in the gym constantly. It did help that he grew to 6'10". That's one of the things that they do talk about in the growth mindset, that there are some genealogy things that help. But the idea here is that students need to understand that you can't be successful without doing anything. And so making sure that it's a process, making sure that it's okay if they get feedback, knowing that if you do something that you can't do well the first time, it's definitely a worthwhile endeavor because it'll make you stronger, instead of having people constantly do the things that are inside their comfort zone. And so I usually try to vary up my assessments, so they're always doing different assessments. I change up their seating arrangements all the time. It drives them nuts. They come in like, why are we set up in this? I'm like, I wanted to change it up. You know, and I'm always trying to look for new visual ways. And the type of person I go into my practice, I want to put all my cones where they are so the kids know exactly what's coming in. But changing things up, letting them know that this is a process that continually helps them build and where they can eventually reach there. Because as a society, we only see the tip of the iceberg. We don't see all the things that help form it or build it up. And so I think I like this infographic just because it really does involve stuff. Like I said before in the very beginning, I couldn't even speak one word, and I'm doing at least a decent job right now communicating with a bunch of people. So I really did not expect myself even to be a teacher when I was in 9th grade. Like, I'm going to speak publicly every single day to teenagers. Like, I was not expecting that. And so just when you build up, or I know that I spent a lot of time extra practice. I had a teacher that stayed after school with me and helped me get better at speech. I pushed myself out of comfort levels, and I did like a full presentation to the student body my senior year as like the student body president. And I was like, what? I didn't even think I was going to be able to do that, but it was because people were pushing along the way. And I'll show you kind of something else at the end that I did this summer that I really didn't think I could do either. But I think it's important for them to know. And I think the last thing is allow students to redo their work. And I kind of talked to you about the filtering. You see right here I have resubmitted work or revisions in Google. You just kind of click on the first time that Google sends you that thing saying, hey, so-and-so did a revision. Click on it, make a filter for it, and then every single one of those revisions will go into a spot. So it doesn't like destroy your mailbox, but you can take a look and see what people are doing. Resubmit and stuff like that. And that's always nice too, because, you know, maybe on Friday I look through who resubmitted. I usually have them go through a process of like, here's my reassessment form, but, you know, I can get in it right away and get done, you know, in 10, 15 minutes because I'm looking at it. Does anyone have any questions on reassessments? Okay. You guys are an easy crowd. Some people don't like that, so. So the one last thing, some people say too, like, don't let them do stuff after the deadline, because it doesn't prepare them for the real world. Let's be honest, in the real world, people don't get fired the very first time they do something wrong, unless it's like really, really bad. But most of the time, if you're just not good at your job to start, you're on like a 3-month probation, or my wife works at Target, and so like they have like coachings, where like the team leader has to go and coach them and give them feedback before they have to go through a whole process. So like just because you missed something or missed stuff, like it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. And so I think some people forget about that sometimes in the real world. Because you ask how many teachers make deadlines on things, and I think they'd be a little bit, you know, looking at the mirror there. Right? And those administrators would be like, yeah, most of them don't get something done. But I think Rick Romelli said it best, students can learn without grades, but they can't learn without timely and descriptive feedback. And so I think it's really important in that growth mindset, giving students the opportunity to get that real-time feedback. And it might be a little bit more hustle and bustle sometimes in the classroom, but it's way more worthwhile than waiting and seeing. And so I usually like to just get in the trenches right away, talk with them. You have more meaningful conversations with them too. Because you think about it too, some students are just like this far away from accessing your content, and without a discussion with them, they may never get there. But if you're able to kind of touch base with them quickly and get them to that point, you don't know where they're going to go next, right? It's just like people get little stumbling blocks. And I found too that, the students that are coming in, they do struggle with that wall sometimes. They see it and they don't want to go over it. They'll walk the other way or they'll walk around it. And so helping them get like strategies to get over that wall is extremely important. And that timely feedback is crucial as a teacher. I mean, I remember in high school, I'd go 3 weeks without getting an assignment back. Be like, I want to know how I did. I just did a master's and I still had like 2 weeks I was waiting for my midterm grades, and it's like, it was killing me. Like, what is going on here? All right, so this is just a quick little thing. I had a monstrosity of a mudroom into my house. Like when we bought it, it was cracked straight through the garage. It was someone decided to turn our garage, our 2-car garage, into a 1-car garage and make a room out of that one side. And it was, right? And so like, that was the place that everyone came through my house. Like for the first 5 years I owned this house, they saw this, what you're gonna see in a second. And like, I was thinking in my head, like, I can't do anything about that. I kept trying to do the project. I kept getting nervous about it, and I would stop. And so just kind of looking at, like, if we're looking at a real life situation, you also get a quick pic of my daughter, who's extremely cute. But looking at a real life situation and how feedback can help constructively. So that is my mudroom. It is just poured concrete, terrible. And this is what I walked through for the first 5 years. And so this summer, I'm like, no, I'm going to tackle this. And I knew that there were certain things in the process that I was going to be able to do. I knew for a fact that after researching a bunch, there was no way I was going to fully be able to concrete that by myself. I did a couple different quotes, and I ended up bringing in someone to help. I did tear down all the other things, and I did have them help with the drywall. But you can see, let's see as we go through, that's different drywall being put up. Because again, I could have done the drywall. I knew how to do that, but I didn't have the time to do it, so it was scaffolded for me. Right? Just like an assignment sometimes, maybe there's certain things you don't want your students to do, scaffold it for them. Right? And so you kind of see a little transformation. I had someone do the tiles for me, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that either. Right? And so those are things that are already built in. Right? Then there was this ugly thing in the middle. Me and my father-in-law talked about it, and I was like, no, I'm going to plaster that thing. So later on you're going to see I plastered that whole thing. I've never plastered a thing in my life. But I watched YouTube videos, I learned about it, I got timely feedback from my wife telling me what spots I hit and didn't hit, and I was up there for 3 nights, going back and forth and through. I did all the rolling, did all the painting, right? Made sure that all the covers got back on, and so I also did some testing of paints. I got feedback, I sent pictures to my mom, I sent pictures to my mother-in-law, I sent pictures to my wife, and they all kind of have consensus of what color we should pick. And so there were a few trips that I went to the store back and forth, right? But one of the things that I kept doing was constantly trying to improve that process, constantly trying to build. I had some help with some timely feedback on how to build a stair from my father-in-law, and so we worked together on that for experience. So again, if I'm working through a unit, the first thing I started off was this cracked floor. As I'm going through the unit, this has been my 4th or 5th formative assessment. Now we're doing all the painting. I kept doing all that. We did have a stainer spill at some point over our brand new tile, so I had to soak that up quickly at 11 a.m. But it was just a whole process of me kind of continually trying to build this new place for my family. Right? And I don't like painting either. I despise it. But I learned different techniques on how to paint. Again, YouTube videos, resources, stuff like that. The color came up pretty well. I got some timely feedback in the moment from my daughter, who's going to show me where I left the tape. She comes through, there she is, right? And yes, she is the cutest person in the world, to be honest with you. And so we were working together on that. She's like, Daddy, you've got tape here. And so I built, so there she goes pulling the tape. And so I had a little help in the beginning, right? The teachers helped me out a little bit with my floor. They gave me some feedback on how to build a staircase. I was scaffolded on the drywall, because again, that would have taken a lot of time. Drywall is tough. Did all the painting myself. I actually built that shoe plate, or whatever it's called. I built that after looking at some plans and getting cuts and stuff like that. So I've never built a thing in my life. One of my wife's best friends came in and said, I didn't know your husband was that handy. So like, get feedback as I'm going through. I went through and tried that a few times. And so by the end, my mudroom looks a lot better than it did before. But it took a lot of timely feedback. I don't know how upset I would get when my wife would come in and she'd be like, you missed a spot. And it was like, after I put everything away. It's like, it's really difficult to fix something when you've already kind of moved on to the next part. And so, again, by being able to do some of those things, by being able to get some of the feedback, by the end I was able to build, and I also built that barn door too. So the barn door was built, and the book, the little shoe thing, my wife went through and decorated it all from Hobby Lobby stuff. But now we have a room that we actually are proud of, and it was a process that wasn't easy, but it was something that I needed help along the way, and I got it. And then once I actually was able to get some of those first steps down, the last few things I was building by myself. So in real life, you're never doing anything by yourself. You are getting frustrated if you don't get timely feedback. There are going to be those times where you drive to the hardware store to get the things that you forgot, or where you have to recut something, right? It just, mistakes happen. And that growth mindset, like, here's where you start, here's where you could end up. And now when people come in, they're like, I can't believe this room is the room that it was before. My father-in-law came in for Thanksgiving. He's like, I can't believe what you guys did with that. So, kind of the conclusion here, right? When you're giving feedback for growth mindset, right? Feedback needs to be process-based. Don't praise talent. I mean, how many times you get a feedback on that says like, good job? That's just talent, right? And like, think about like, good job taking the so-and-so from our last formative and adding it in, if you're giving that feedback, right? Or look at this assignment to help you with this part, or you miss kind of the spot on this, here's what you can add. You know, like, good job, nice work. You know, like those old process, like progress report comments. Timely, give it to students when they need it. So if you wait 2 weeks to give a student comment, they're never going to look at it again. There's no way. I mean, they might even look at it 2 days from now, right? That's how quick they are. Because I mean, think about it. Snapchat's the new big social media, right? I just got into Twitter, and now they're on the Snapchat. But those things, like, they go quick, right? And they have to keep streaks alive. They have to keep going. If they don't do it one day, they lose it. And so, like, they're looking for stuff instantly from you, which is very difficult sometimes. Needs to be monitored. Student progress is dynamic. And it changes depending on what unit you're working on too. So you need to have things in place to understand where they are with their process, like looking back at their Google Docs, making sure that you have, I've done before, I make Google Sheets of all the kids and where they are, because I can copy and paste it right from my, my grade book. And so I actually have a list of who's at LPs on a competency, who's at that, and I can check that as I'm going. And then student-friendly, students need to understand the feedback they're given as well. Make sure that your rubrics are student-friendly. Make sure that your comments are student-friendly. So does anybody have any questions? Yes?
What kind of grade book do you use?
Great question. We use Pinnacle. It's not bad. I did take a look at, there's a thing in the vendors, it's called Jump Rope. That looked pretty cool. But the grading system is nice because it does put the grades out in real time to the parents and the students. So that's something that's really helpful. So the minute that I put a grade in, the students and the parents can see it. Although that would be the second time they've seen it because the grades are always on the document first. So Pinnacle is what we use right now for our competencies. It's not perfect, but it does a lot of good things as well. So I don't know where that question came from charge-wise, but that's my answer. Did anyone get anything out of this? I hope so. I know it's the last session, so I appreciate you guys listening to me. If you have any questions, you can always email me, and you can follow me on Twitter if you want. But thank you guys for coming.